Hi, welcome Nitin. Welcome to this CTQ SmartCast.
Thank you, Harish. It's always a pleasure. And this is the first time I'm doing it solo, so a little bit of nervousness there, but I'm sure you will help me along.
Oh yes, I'll definitely help you. I'll pull your leg and I will send some curveballs your way.
Sure.
So today we wanted to talk about how should senior leaders be thinking about future relevance. So the first basic question, just to set the context. So what is future relevance? What does it really mean for senior leaders like you?
Yeah, actually, I'm a bad example for that matter, simply for two reasons. One, first reason is that I'm too senior, meaning for future में कुछ भी हो गया तो it's okay for me. It won't bother me so much. But it's definitely an important issue for people who are not that senior but are senior enough. So that's one thing. And the other reason why I think it's not as relevant is that at least I consider myself, as opposed to my age, I consider myself more in tune with the current generation, and therefore again in that sense I don't think of myself as senior. But either way, your question is still valid. And the point is that the way technology is moving and the way pandemic of course was the biggest sort of a something which nobody could have anticipated. But everything else, the pace, the acceleration that is happening in terms of technology, in terms of other things, in terms of media and so on, uh, unfortunately not everybody can remain relevant. Sometimes because of they fall behind technology, sometimes they fall behind the norms of the new generation. And unfortunately, whether they like it or not, they have to work with the new generation. And to be able to manage people, to be able to manage the technology, and these two things together becomes a very potent combination if you don't remain relevant. So that's why if you are senior and if you want to remain in that kind of a position where you are trying to guide a company or guide a group of people, then there's no choice for you but to remain relevant on both those fronts.
Yeah. So Nitin, you mentioned about the pandemic. Some people were joking that the pandemic was the digital transformation officer for many companies, right? So with the world around us changing so fast, changing so rapidly, do leadership styles and mental models need to be refreshed?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, pandemic, of course, was a very extreme example, but I'll tell you my own example. And generally, I try to give talk from my experience. From my own experience, the leadership style, the biases that one has, they keep evolving. I'll give you two concrete examples. One is that when I was young, and I was fortunately I was always in a managerial position and then an entrepreneurial position. So I had that kind of a clout or whatever. So I used to say to my kids who were very young that time that I'll never hire a person with a man with a ponytail and or a ear piercing or even a tattoo,
Hmm.
because I used to associate that in my mind. I used to associate that with casualness, not serious enough, all of that. And fortunately, I didn't have to actually act on it because those days it was relatively rare. And then fast forward, when I was an entrepreneur, I was working in the US and Canada and all that. And there I met the first person I met who had all those three things, right? Ponytail, ear piercings, tattoos. I don't know what else, what other piercings. And he was supposed to be my sort of main client, right? The guy who was supposed to implement my software there. And I said, oh my God, like this is a disaster. And then I actually started working with him. And guess what? Literally in 3 days, I realized how wrong I was. And I realized nobody could have been more sincere, nobody could have been more intelligent, nobody could have been more dedicated than this person. I still remember his name was Rick in Vancouver. And that's when I realized that just we associate a lot of people don't. I don't wear, for example, jeans to office, but just because you're wearing jeans and sneakers to office, that doesn't take away from your sincerity or your willingness. To the extent that, of course, after that I realized that's probably become the de facto uniform of techies. So things change, things constantly evolve. This is just one example. Another example I'll give you about the mental model, how it has to change. I was a firm believer in not working from home. I used to always think that ये work from home मांग रहा है मतलब time pass करने का इसको. He is not going to work enough. And of course, there were exceptions always. And I used to say to myself that, okay, if Harish asks for work from home, that's okay because I know he's sincere. But if Rishabh asks for it, then these kind of, mental blocks, or I used to try to judge the person based on how many times he worked from home and things like that. And again, that in fact, the pandemic really changed that on its head. And to the extent that now I say that as and when we do go back to this hybrid model, we are thinking just broadly thinking that we'll probably have 6 weeks at home and 1 week in the office, or 5 weeks at home, 1 week in the office, something like that. And I'm telling my managers now that look, that 1 week when your team is going to be in the office, assume your productivity is going to be minimal. All your productivity is going to be at home. When they come to office, they will be spending more time in gossiping and abusing you and all that, rather than actually doing work and having lunches and dinners and whatnot and catching up. So just imagine, it's like a 180-degree turn, right? From work from home being associated with low productivity to that's the only way to work. That's where you're going to get productivity. So these are the kind of things that need to be refreshed all the time. And these are probably two extreme examples, but I'm sure there are several others like that.
Nitin, you gave these examples and you talked about how these were like, these hit you in the face. But in order to acknowledge this, you also need to be open. You need to be ready to acknowledge that, yeah, there is a change. So, how do you manage to do that?
You're absolutely right, actually. I always say that the first thing that you need to improve is a willingness to accept that the current situation is not the best, or the way I'm behaving is not the best,
Hmm.
that there could be a better way of doing it. And oftentimes, when we give feedback to people also about their own individual performance, etc., I find that there are some people who come with a very defensive mindset, and there's an excuse for everything that you would say. And in my mind, I know that this guy is not going to improve because he's not willing to accept that he could be doing something which can be done better. I'm not saying it was bad, but it can be done better in a better way or better whatever. I think that's what is the most important, the attitude that if you listen to others, and it helps. From in my case, it helps that I am always surrounded by people much younger and much smarter, generally. It's you once you acknowledge that the younger generation, unlike when people say that the younger generation is generally smarter than you are. Some characteristics might be different, not just the physical and visible characteristics, but mental characteristics might be different. But they think of better ways of doing things. They think of better ideas, and you should be willing to listen and introspect. And again, it might sound cliched, but that's really what it is. You should be willing to, if somebody is doing something differently, you should be willing to examine with an open mind, is it better than what I'm doing? And if so, embrace it. One of my company's core values, we have only four values, unlike many other companies. And one of them is start by listening. And I really thought that it was a really brilliant way of putting it. That start by listening. Don't start by talking or telling others. Start by listening, no matter who you are. So that's one thing. And the other thing, the second value, since I'm on the value, the other thing is radical candor,
Right.
which communicate with candor, which means that not only do you want to listen, but also you want to speak as frankly as you possibly can without being rude or without being insulting. So once you put these two things together, and this it just so happens that the current company has these two values, but I realize that innately, the first one, particularly start by listening, is something which I've always believed in. It was not articulated like that. But a quick anecdote. So in another previous company, we used to collect feedback and all that from 360-degree feedback typically. So my HR head actually told me that the only thing I'll tell you is that you give your time too freely to employees and to vendors and everybody else, which means that, and that's why you have to work harder because you have to spend more time. So why don't you cut it down? And I thought about it and I said, no, this is something which is very important to me because this is exactly what I want to do. I want to listen to people down the line, not just people who report to me, but across the board, and my vendors and my customers. And that's the only way I'll learn the truth. Otherwise, if you rely only on the reports and what your reportees tell you, then you are going to be like living in an ivory tower.
Right.
So that's the other thing which helps me do that.
Yeah, yeah. Nice anecdote there, Nitin. And probably that is going to lead to the next question. So, what is expected from you today as a leader that was not expected, say, back in the early 2000s or even
Mm.
before then?
Yeah. So first, one thing, specific years may be different, but in general, the opportunities were not as many.
Hmm.
And right now, today, when we are sitting in end of September 2021, it's gone to the other extreme. Where I remember the saying that there was a board put up in the campus saying that trespassers will be recruited. So it's that kind of a thing right now. But even if you take this extreme situation aside, in general, the opportunities, the kind of opportunities which are available are so many more now. So it was a little easier to retain people, even if the technology was not the sexiest. Your COBOL, for example, I grew up on COBOL when I started my. We didn't think of any problem of working on COBOL, even though people kept saying that this technology is going to be dead soon, etc. They still work on COBOL, by the way. But even in the 80s and 90s, people used to say that this is going to be outdated, etc. It was people, we didn't have this fear of losing people because of technology. Also, training people was very different. It was, in some sense, it was more difficult because that time we had to do a classroom training, you had to have a batch, right? So you couldn't afford to have individualized trainings. Today, with all the, like, everyone and his dog is doing Python now and calling themselves a data scientist, right? So that seems to be the, like, the flavor of the month. So
Started.
I know, yeah. But that was, but imagine those days, Infosys and TCS and everybody else, Wipro. I remember going to Infosys and looking at their training center. Oh my God, it was like a university. And I had gone there as a customer, so they showed me with great detail as to what all they did, which was very impressive. They had a battalion of PhDs who were educationists who were there better than any university that I could see. So that it was a big job. It was really not easy. Now, it's so much easier. I mean, you want to get somebody trained, it's so much easier. Also, one other thing which was very different was, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, but different, was the whole political correctness and this whole Me Too and grievances and all that was, I think the skins have definitely become thinner now. And again, like I said, I don't mean to say it in a bad way. I'm not saying that what has happened is bad, but like it or not, it was not really, you could you could give feedback using some words which would be considered harassment or more than that today. Even some of the terms did not exist, right? If at that time you had mentioned the alphabet LGBTQIA in one sequence, they would have thought you are mad, right? Today you automatically it means something,
Right.
and you immediately realize that, yeah, I mean, you got to be sensitive to these things. So this was different. And of course, the whole VUCA thing, right? We all know that how the whole volatility is just accelerating. In those days, it was relatively secure. I remember when Y2K was around the corner, right? People were working on Y2K for years, like 4 or 5 years. Pandemic, what one fine day you just realize there's no 5 years notice for that. One day you have to pack up and start working from home. So that's the kind of volatility that has come about today. And of course, the world is now much flatter, and therefore your reach is global. Today, when we arrange an event for, let's say, you are talking to me when we happen to be in the same city right now, but
Right.
you could be talking to somebody sitting across the globe. And we now have events where we call, I mean, the other day we had a SEAP event where we called Amit Fadnis, who was speaking from Wisconsin. So those are the things which have started making, now those are good things and bad things. So today, when if Google wants to recruit from Pune or Nagpur, they can do it. And you and I, or at least we have to compete with them to offer a job and the salary and the kind of work that they do. So much, the whole, all these things put together, it's the job has become so much different, and it's exciting. It's, in some ways it is difficult, and that's probably why it is also exciting.
So you spoke about what has changed. So what has remained the same in terms of expectations from a leader?
Lots of things, actually. The most important thing I would say is the culture, the cultural aspect, which means being honest, being transparent, being having integrity, being humble. I talked about listening, genuinely caring for people and their growth. See, people see through it very easily. Like companies talk about, we'll give you this growth and that growth, but if it is not sincere, if it's not sincere, it's pretty apparent very soon that it is not what people, and that's why then you have attrition. And I'm not saying we don't have attrition, but typically we tend to have lesser attrition than the others. We tend to get much better sort of engagement results and so on and so forth. So just as example, our internal engagement surveys are were always very good, 95% plus, proving it on every count. But we just did a great place to work certification, and literally 2 days ago they told us that we don't know the details, but they said that you're certified. They put our name on the list. Now this doesn't happen unless you genuinely care for people, and that doesn't change no matter all the other things changing. And that how you show that caring can take different can be manifested in different ways. Like in COVID times, you have to show your care in different ways. At other times, you show it in different ways. But that's something which will always be. So long as people are there, people caring for each other and being honest and listening to each other will always be there. And the equity, the whole fairness bit, right? No matter what your and inclusivity, I put the two together, equity and inclusivity. The other thing which doesn't change is customer focus. Lots of new tools have come in. The whole CRM thing is so big, and but then ultimately there's no substitute for you genuinely caring for the customer success and genuinely caring for what the customer is saying. You can, in some situations, you feel that you can be I'll give you a classic Pune example, right? People used to joke about chitaris, right? How they don't care about the customer. But today, look at chitaris. They care, they show their care about the customer much more. So I don't know whether you're forced to do it because of the competition or the new generation that came in, changed it or whatever. But today, it's like they're growing like crazy. They were always good, but
Right.
probably not as customer focused as they are today. And then the growth automatically comes. So that's the other part which doesn't change. You care about the customer. You either fulfill a need for the customer or fix a hotspot for the customer. One of the two, right? I mean, unless you satisfy a need, a genuine need, you're not going to go anywhere. And how do you know that need unless you actually relate to the customer and try to find out?
Yeah, so I think what you basically talked about is the human centricity, whether it is employees or customers, right? Think
Yeah,
of your customer as somebody that you care for,
yeah,
empathizing with both sides of the of the boundary, I guess, is
absolutely,
what you're
absolutely.
talking
And
about.
by the way, I should just add, because I said about employees and customers, the third dimension which people often forget is the vendors, your
Right.
partners. Calling them vendors sounds a little insulting, but ultimately they're giving you some service or goods.
Hmm.
Again, I'll give you a quick example. During the pandemic, many people went back, and obviously the offices were shut for a long time. So all the housekeeping staff and the security, all those people were laid off, right? I
Hmm.
mean, and
Hmm.
usually they're not your employees anyway, so you feel less bad about, put it
Hmm.
that way. No, you don't feel as bad.
Hmm.
And you tell the company we can manage without it, or we didn't do that. We told the companies who were giving that manpower to us, with the housekeeping, pantry boys, and all the
Hmm.
security and all that. Look, we don't need them, but so long as they are there and they are available, if we need them tomorrow, we will keep paying them. We'll keep paying you, and you have to keep paying them, and you have to prove to us that you're actually paying them.
Hmm.
And we have been doing that. We still do that. Our office is still closed now 1.5 years. We have not let go a single person, even though they were not on our rolls. And because ultimately, even though they are vendors, see, if we don't pay them, they will probably have no choice but not to pay their
Correct.
employees, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then we have more of the problems that we have today. This is one
Hmm.
example. The other example I'll say is that anytime somebody tries to negotiate, my procurement department tried to negotiate too much, etc. And if I found out, and I said, look, remember that unless that guy makes a reasonable profit, right? It's like not in your interest if he doesn't make a reasonable profit.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
want him to make a reasonable profit.
Right.
Yes, it should not be abnormal profit, but
Hmm.
you want him to prosper. You want him to do reasonably well. And that again, that's an attitude which most people don't understand, particularly on the procurement side.
Yeah, again, I think that's a great example. Nitin, we know that you love your quizzing, so we're going to interject this interview with a couple
Sure.
of quiz questions. And I hope the latter part of this question is factually correct as well. So, Sajjan Lal Purohit acted in many Bollywood films from 1948 to 1996, though the 96 one I think was an uncreated one. But his most memorable role was in a Ramanand Sagar produced TV show starring Arun Govil. How is his role, the character, connected with Pune, and I'm guessing your current background as well?
How is his role in the
Yeah,
serial?
in that series, yes.
So that was obviously Ramayan.
Okay, it's
Um,
not Ramayana.
no, it's not Ramayan.
Yeah, and that's why I
Arun
said
Govil.
it's
Ah,
produced by
acha,
Ramanand
acha,
Sagar.
acha, acha, acha. Okay.
I think directed
So,
by his son. Not Bhandarkar
no,
Institute. Not
okay.
Bhandarkar Institute.
Then,
No, not
no,
Film Institute. Think of the second most famous TV show on DD starring Arun Govil.
Mahabharat.
Not Mahabharat. He was not in Mahabharat.
No, you're not. So Arun Govil was in. Sorry,
One season, I think hardly 26 episodes, 26 stories.
Arun Govil. No, no, I can't remember.
He character was Vikramaditya.
Vikramaditya. Okay, okay. Yeah, I didn't see that one. So how is Vikramaditya related to
Vikram or
Gune?
Vikramaditya. Vikram. Think of the other character, Vikram and who?
Yeah, Vital Degri.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Oh yeah, now okay, not Vikramaditya. Vikram and Vital. Vikram or Vital. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh
Yes.
yeah, I should have
Yes.
known that. I should have definitely known that. Yeah, by the way, I mean, I somehow for a moment, you said Arun, I was in my mind, I was picturizing Nitish Bharadwaj. And
Okay.
Nitish Bharadwaj, surprisingly, you may not know this, but he came on some Marathi musical reality show. And the guy not only speaks Marathi, but his Marathi and his knowledge of Marathi literature and music is phenomenal. Phenomenal
Yes.
is the only word. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. 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 He also plays tennis at Ferguson College occasionally. If
Okay.
you are ever in that area, you may
Okay.
just
Okay.
bump into him.
I see. Okay. All right. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
hill in the background,
Vital
which is
Degri.
basically Vetal Tekdi, named
Yeah.
after a temple of Vetal on
Yes.
top.
Yes. Yes.
And Sajjan Lal Purohit played the role of Vetal in
Yes.
Vikram or
Yes.
Vetal. So
That's
the
absolutely
connection.
right. In fact, yeah, and with Sajjan Lal Purohit, I kept thinking of all the Hindi film roles that he was playing.
Right.
Nice.
All right, let's move on to the
Yeah.
next part, Nitin. So, how should younger leaders, entrepreneurs think about their future relevance, their individual future relevance?
Yeah. I think a lot of the things that I said earlier, right? Those are the principles that you got to embrace. So, one, constantly willing to learn. And learning is not just through formal means, but also learning by interacting with people, learning by adapting to technology. Oftentimes, I've been in companies where you've been using something and somebody comes up with an idea that, look, can we change the technology? And generally, the established view is, oh, it's things are going well. Why do you want to rock the boat? Let's Everything is fine. But that's a wrong way of doing it. If you want to be relevant in today's world, particularly with the VUCA things that I talked about, I think people will have to constantly be willing to try things out, maybe fail in a lot of them. And this is not just about entrepreneurs. For entrepreneurs, I think those entrepreneurial people understand this, that you have to keep experimenting, keep trying, and keep failing forward and so on. But leaders in the conventional sense, who are in managers in companies, etc., oftentimes don't try to be too risk averse and don't. And the problem with that is, if you continue to stick to the status quo and not really try things out or not really change with the times, soon you'll become irrelevant. I often quote good friend Anand Deshpande, right? He had once told me long ago, the way the Indian IT industry is going, the middle management, people typically with like 15 years experience, they have come to a stage where they only forward emails. And he said, mind you, I'm not saying write emails. This is not even the right emails, only forward emails. FYA, FYI is the only thing that they write.
Hmm.
And that's the layer which will obviously become very irrelevant and redundant. Already that has started happening, and a lot of companies, they have done that. They've pruned out that layer which was not really relevant in any other sense. And this whole concept of just being people managers. And by the way, I'm in that situation today, but I would like to believe that I do add value in terms of understanding what should be done, the strategy, and so on. But a lot of them don't understand that if you don't add value, and if you are just a people manager, it can't last for long. So particularly in today's world, so younger leaders have to either you have to have the technology edge, or you have to have some other marketing edge, or you have to have something which, apart from just taking care of people. And yes, taking care of people is important, very important, but you got to have something else also. So you have to keep yourself relevant.
And even in the context of taking care of people, I think a lot of things are changing, so you have to be mindful of that as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if your people feel that you are not adding any value to them also, then they will stop respecting you. And that's the worst thing that can happen to a leader.
Yeah, yeah. And Nitin, what are your primary sources of knowledge and insight? You spoke about spending a lot of time talking to people. I personally know you're very active on Twitter as well. So besides these, what are your primary sources of knowledge and
Yeah,
insights?
you took away most of my answer by saying that, but that's true. No. Being on active on Twitter, see, some people are active on Twitter and some people are passive active. What I mean is they may not contribute, but they use Twitter as a important source of information. So I do a lot of that, by the way, apart from writing once in a while, which is not too much. Whether it is Twitter, Facebook, articles from journals like HBR, etc. The only thing which I don't do, unlike most of my family, is subscribe to your daily readership compound and weekly and all that. But I do know that they are really very good. I keep recommending it to people, by the way. I don't know whether you know that. I
Yes,
keep
yes.
recommending to people, but but I don't do it myself, and not because I really think it's good, but it's just that I get that kind of a thing from various other sources also.
Right.
So I do a lot of reading. The what has I used to read a lot of books also, but I'm not a great fan of the what they call what I would call the what is it called? Dale Carnegie book, How to
Mm-hmm.
Influence People, etc. Or the
Mm-hmm.
no, I call it
Right.
psychology books. I don't really enjoy much.
Hmm.
If things like Good to Great by Jim Collins, or some of
Hmm.
the books by Malcolm Gladwell,
Hmm.
Outliers, for example, things like that. I like reading *Sapiens*, and I don't always enjoy the whole thing, but that's something which is important. But more importantly, again. Many people have stopped subscribing to newspapers, particularly after the pandemic. We get about 5 every day, and I think 8 on the weekends. So Marathi, English, different kinds, including the Hindu, for various reasons. Something we buy for the content, something we buy for the crossword, something we buy for the comics, something we buy for the local news, etc., etc. Something you just because you want to read in Marathi. Earlier, I used to read a lot of Hindi and Gujarati also, but
Hmm.
those days I don't get them here. But I do try to read that if possible. So just read as much as you can, and even though time is always limited, that's one. And of course, the other thing which you mentioned, meeting people, but also I am active in a lot of industry forums.
Hmm.
So I'm active in SEAP as well, and then I used to be with TIE, no longer with TIE, but I'm also with the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce. In these forums, you meet a lot of people, you exchange notes. So my best source of information for what's happening in the industry, whether it's attrition, whether it is no-show statistics or whatever, recruitment challenges, etc., is just talking to a few friends when
Hmm.
you meet. And during the pandemic, it was more virtual. Just started meeting people again, but that's actually gives you a lot of insights. And luckily, I don't know whether it's true with other cities also, because I've always worked in Pune in India. So luckily in Pune, I find that people are very open and willing to collaborate. And so long as it's nothing very confidential, people
Hmm.
are very free with talking about what they are finding and what they are doing and so on, even sharing sources, sharing contacts, all of that. So that really gives me that knowledge.
Right, right. Yeah. A lot of what you're talking about, I'm reminded of other smartcasts that we have done where, similar ideas, concepts have been mentioned. Of course, we did one with Dr. Anand Deshpande. He spoke about this. We did one with Arun Iyer, who actually moved from a business consulting kind of a role to now a product manager role. So he talked about how this whole thing about constantly reinventing himself was talked about. And what you mentioned about Twitter is again something that Naveen talked about, where he spoke
Hmm.
about using Twitter as something like a tuning fork, right? You keep talking about the things that you are interested in, and it will resonate with someone. And that's how you can actually put social media to good use for innovation, for learning as well. So I see,
Actually,
that
yeah,
is
particularly Naveen and of course Amit also, Amit Paranspe. These two are classic examples of how to use Twitter in a really good way.
correct.
It's amazing, and I've even got tips from them about how to search it within that and how to get what you need without getting bombarded by all the junk that is floating.
Yeah. Nitin, do you have any systems or routines or hacks for capturing and reflecting on what you learn about the world and people you deal with? Do you make notes? Do you have something like that?
Actually, in that sense, I'm quite disorganized. I wish I was much more systematic. My son, for example, people like to talk good about their sons, but couple of things that he does, I wish I was as good as him in that sense. One, he keeps a meticulous to-do list every day, strikes off and what is urgent, fantastic. I don't do that. I'm a little more I first of all, I hate pen and paper.
Okay.
I've given up pen and paper. Sometimes your people tell me to sign by hand. It's a real task to sign, particularly if there are 50 signatures. But so I don't do that. But I do use some tools. So tools meaning Outlook has so many features and the reminders, and on the phone also you have that. So I do, if I want to remember something to be done every week or every month, I just put a reminder, repeated reminder, and I use it in like a side. I'll tell you. So for all my batches from both my college, undergrad and postgrad, I'm the kind of official birthday timekeeper for the batch. So every morning, like 5 o'clock or six, before 6 o'clock, my thing goes out to the group. That's it's such and such person's birthday, and then people just follow. So sometimes
Right.
one day something happened and I was sick or something like that. I didn't wish somebody, and he got offended. He said, "You were not the first to wish me." So anyway, so that aside, also one simple hack that I use is just to create a to read folder in on my computer. So anytime I don't have the time right now, but I want to read it, I just put that link or the article in that to read folder and then go back to it whenever I find the time. I did experiment, but I didn't was not successful with it, and I've forgotten now. There was a tool which comes, you might actually know it, which you can bookmark a thing across all devices. What is it called?
Pocket kind of a thing.
Pocket. Yeah.
Yes,
So I
yes.
tried to go to Pocket, but somehow didn't. I should try it again. But that's another thing which I thought was really useful. But most importantly, I have a routine where, so for example, there are some things which I do every morning at 5 o'clock when I get up and while I'm having my chai. So around half an hour that time. And then lunchtime, I book usually 1 to 2, I book for lunchtime. So lunch doesn't take 1 hour, right? Lunch takes about 15 minutes. So remaining 30 to 45 minutes, I do for this kind of a thing. So that's a daily routine. So every day, no matter what I'm doing, that's the time in the morning and in the afternoon, and maybe if time permits at night before sleeping. So these are the sort of three slots which I use.
Right, right. Nitin, tell us about the courses, books, podcasts, articles, sites that have influenced your way of thinking and help you stay future relevant, even people for that matter.
Hmm. Yeah. I mentioned couple of them to you earlier: Jim Collins, Malcolm Gladwell. Of course, Malcolm Gladwell. Unfortunately, his Outliers was a book which really I enjoyed, and I used to quote that 10,000 hours of work to become a. And then later, I found out that it was all bogus. So, but guess what? It's still a good idea, right? But so sometimes it does happen. In fact, there's a Marathi saying, I can't remember exactly now, but something about when you go too close to a hero, you find that his feet are made of mud.
Right.
Something to that effect.
Yeah.
That's the feeling I got when I read about that Malcolm Gladwell thing. But and sometimes what happens is that in your formative years, you read something which at that time you don't even understand. For example, when I was a small kid, like probably primary school, I used to live with my grandparents, and for some reason, they were obviously much older and they were much more religious, etc. So I read the whole Gita in terms of Naneshwari, the Marathi version, and they were what he wrote. Read the whole thing, didn't understand most of it. Even today, I don't understand much of it. But then what happens is that you read it, you may not understand it. And that happens with a lot of literature also. Like you read something, you don't understand the full thing, but then sometime later it comes back to you in some situation. And you think, like you don't even realize it has come from there. So that's the thing which I think is very important to keep reading. Like the other thing which I really think is that, and this is something which I don't know how whether it is whether people will agree with it or not. When people talk about take a cricketing legend like Sachin Tendulkar, right? People say, "Oh, he has so much time. He has so many shots to play for the same ball." Same thing with Virat Kohli or Rohit or whatever. But I think what you think that they think and do it. They don't. They've
Right.
a lot of them have said that it's instinctive. I, but then is it really instinct? Is it just luck or is it just like something else? No, it's probably they've worked so hard at it and they've done it so many times in the nets, in the various matches, that it becomes muscle memory. And you even they will not be able to explain to you exactly what the physical or the chemical science behind that, how they played that stroke is. I think a lot of leadership also can be like that. Meaning you may not, if you start analyzing it too much, then you end up with that analysis paralysis.
Right.
And I've known several leaders, unfortunately, who have been prey to that. I don't. like to analyze too much. In fact, I always tell people also, don't try to achieve for perfection, because
Hmm.
the marginal increase in value. So suppose you have done some presentation, created a presentation in, let's say, 2 hours, and which you think is 95% okay. How much time will it take to go to 97%? Maybe another 2 hours. To
Hmm.
98%, another 2 hours. 98.5, another 2 hours. And to go from 99.5 to 99.9 will probably take a day.
Hmm.
So I'm saying that you need to, as leaders in real life, you have to be able to say, okay, the concept like MVP, right?
Right.
Minimum viable product. So
Hmm.
everything that you do, you
Hmm.
can take the approach of minimum viable product.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not saying that you compromise on quality. That's not the
Right.
message at all.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you have to know where to draw the line in spending more and more time on trying to improve something which is good enough.
Hmm. Hmm.
Same with decisions, because even if you'll never reach 100% in any
Hmm.
decision,
Hmm.
there's always some chance that it will fail. Now, should you try to achieve 99.9% guarantee, then you'll never do anything.
Hmm.
You'll never be able to move ahead.
Hmm.
So that's the kind of thing that I learned again. So I don't do too much reading, too much analysis, too many tools. Yes, you need the data. You need to ponder over it. You do a little bit of thing and then go ahead and do it. So that's the other thing which kind of I think is a quality which I think serves me well. I don't know whether it will serve others well or not.
I think all these things that you've talked about, I think it's important for them to be enablers and you not being subservient to these tools,
Correct.
right? They have to
Correct.
be aiding you. As long as that is being done, it's fine. But you can't be hostage to these kinds of things. Yeah. Then you spoke about cricket, so I think it's time to bring out a
Quiz.
cricket question. I think this is going to be very
Sure.
easy. You're going to hit it out of the park. So only Bombay, Karnataka, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Delhi, and one other team have managed to win Ranji Trophy in consecutive years. Which is the other team?
Vidarbha.
Of course, you get that right.
Most people won't get it. It's only because I am a Vidarbha fan at
Of
heart.
course.
And Wasim Jafar is a hero because of that for me.
Correct, correct,
Even
correct.
though he
Yeah.
was an import from Mumbai,
Import,
but
yes.
he just transformed. And you should look at his tweets and all that. He's such an amazing guy.
Yeah, yeah. And you could see that Vidarbha was a project that was being
Yeah,
built towards that, right?
yeah.
It was not a flash in the pan. It was over a period of time that they built towards this.
Since we are talking about that interesting anecdote, so probably one of the people who influenced in all this was Shashank Manohar.
Hmm.
He was also obviously from Nagpur and Vidarbha
Right.
president, and then later became all the way up to ICC president. So interesting, what shall we say, trivia. So Shashank and I used to play tennis ball underhand cricket when we were like 5 years old.
Oh, okay.
We were neighbors.
Nice. And you played cricket at a competitive level?
Yeah. So school, yes, Nagpur schools also, and then played for IIT, played for IIM, played for IIT in the inter-university tournament. So
Mhm.
my biggest sort of when people say what was the most proud moment, it was not about the academics or anything else. It was when I got introduced and Mushtaq Ali, the great
Hmm.
Mushtaq Ali in
Right.
Indore when we had gone to play
Hmm.
inter-varsity cricket.
Hmm.
So he
Hmm.
was the chief guest and got introduced to him and got a cap from him. That was my proudest
Wow.
moment.
Great, great, great. Yeah. Any lessons from cricket that you employ in your management and leadership style as well?
I'm sure I do, but I don't know how whether I'll be able to articulate them. Like I said, a lot of it
Correct.
becomes instinctive. But the example that I gave about being instinct taking over, that
Hmm.
definitely. Even when you are answering questions in a rapid fire way, etc., it's like a fast bowler bowling a ball at you, right? You
Right.
don't have time to think, analyze, and then play. You have to
Correct.
immediately let the muscle memory take over.
Right.
So a lot of times there are situations which are like that fast bowling
Hmm.
at you.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
don't have the luxury of ठीक है analysis करेंगे,
Right.
we do the this model, that model. You don't have the time for that. You have to
Correct.
decide and move on.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's what you do in such cases.
Yeah. All right. Moving to the next few questions, Nitin. So, what do you look for in your leaders in terms of how they think of their own future relevance? Their own future relevance.
Okay.
People you are
Um,
trying to hire, basically.
yeah. So I think when we are trying to hire, in fact, that's when somebody asked me, how do you grow these companies? And we have done that 3 times now. key is to hire the right kind of people. And when I say right kind of people, it's exactly what I talked about, that the people who are thinking like you, not necessarily agreeing with you on everything, but who have the same values like you,
Hmm.
meaning the care for people, right? That's one example. Integrity, or being honest, being candid, being open to feedback, listening. These are things which, and by the way, it's not very common to find these people in many of the companies that I worked in. You don't see them all around you. So if you can, and people are genuinely interested in making a difference. Now, does it mean that I'm always able to identify these characteristics? No, I try to. Sometimes I fail miserably.
Hmm.
Without quoting names, I'll tell you that one person which I thought was the best person ever hired, and like, how could I get so lucky? I had to fire in 2 weeks.
Hmm.
So that also happens, but
Right.
fortunately, that ratio is very small. Very rarely that I've had to actually do that.
Hmm.
By and large, people reciprocate. By and large, so if you have analyzed the basic parts, how do you assess it? You try to, what I do is I try to ask them about. I give you an example of what moment I was most proud of, right? So I asked them, what are you most proud of? I asked them, what was your most challenging thing and how did you tackle it? What was a single failure that you had, and how did you deal with it? Why did you think you failed, and what changes did you make? Give me an example of some people issue that you had and how you went about it. And then if somebody was not working out, how did you deal with that poor performer? Do you have any example of a poor performer becoming a star, etc., etc.? So
Hmm.
these are situational things that you ask, and then through that you try to, because if you ask somebody, do you have integrity, obviously the answer is yes, no matter what, whether it is yes or no. So those are not the right questions. So ask these situational questions. Ask about depending on what role they are in, some ethical dilemma that they were into, how did they resolve it, etc., etc. If I'm looking at a procurement person, I might even say that, okay, give me an example where the vendor was trying to influence you in some way. What did you do about it?
Hmm.
Now, even if you took a bribe, he's not going to tell me that. But
Hmm.
then you figure it out, as to what the way the person speaks about it, way the person talks, etc.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And talking about these India sites of product companies, MNCs typically, whatever we call them, GIC, GCC, then you've spent a significant amount of your time building and growing these kind of sites. So, how can these sites remain future relevant, and what should leaders, site heads be doing in order to increase the value they add as a site to the parent company?
Yeah, a very important question, and I think I can speak for a day just on this. But so let me tell you a few things that come to my top of my mind. One is that you should benchmark yourself against the peers all the time, whether it is through Glassdoor, Ambition Box. I told you about Great Place to Work. Zeno has its own. For GCCs, they have their own sort of maturity model and so on. So I at least we try to keep doing that to figure out where do you stand with others, and you always try to benchmark yourself with people who are been there longer than you, bigger than you, so that you can be aspirational. That's one. Second thing, and of course, if you wherever you find that you're not doing as well, then try to introspect how you could do better. Talk to people, try to figure out what they're doing. The second thing is that I think site leaders, particularly site leaders, they should dare to do things differently from their headquarters.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying don't be aligned with the headquarters philosophy or ethos, or obviously you have to be aligned with that. But the Indian context is quite different, and you have to try to do things differently. And for that, you need a lot of influencing ability. I'll tell you a quick story. So when I was being considered for the job at Eclipses, which later became Allscripts, I was meeting the CEO in California in Santa Cruz. Over dinner, he asked me something which you did in the earlier company, and I gave him an example, and I said we did this kind of a scheme, and etc., etc., and this is how it worked. Basically how we could retain people, attract people, etc. And he said, suddenly he says, how did you convince the management in the US to do this? Because this is unheard of in the US.
Hmm.
So I said, I'm probably going to either get the job or you're going to throw me out, because the answer is I never asked them. I just did it. And luckily the gamble worked and he gave me the job. But I told him I don't ask for every single thing.
Hmm.
Like, So long as I know I am doing the right thing, I'm not blowing the company's money, and I have the budget is appropriate, etc. I said I would rather do it myself. And unfortunately, a lot of GCC leaders don't do that. They are too dependent. Everything they have to ask and that. Then why are you needed? They can run it from there. And by the way, a lot of companies have gone to that route also. They have eventually got rid of one leader in the GCC, and each sort of department of business unit reports into the US, and there's no real head here. There's nothing like that here, and that happens because you are not adding any different value. And this typically happens when it's become bigger. When you're small, then they need you because
Right.
But as you become bigger, then and that's it. That's why I said I could talk about a day. Examples of I'll tell you one example that I'll give you is parking. Right? Traditionally, in the US or anywhere else, the company gives you free parking. In India, it's a huge premium, right?
Correct.
Also, cars, particularly two-wheeler parking, generally mil jata. Cars is not so easy to get. So what I did in my previous company was something which was completely opposite, right? I said, we are going to provide free transport to everybody, no matter which shift, when you are coming. Of course, you have to come in specific times,
Right.
etc. But we'll give you free transport. But if you choose to come on your own, absolutely be my guest, but you bloody well pay for the parking. So not only do you pay for fuel, etc., and it was not small. Way back in 2009, 10, something like that, it was about 2,500 rupees a month, which is like today's
Right.
5,000-6,000 rupees
Correct.
for cars, and something similar, 500 rupees or 700 rupees for the two-wheelers. And people used to all the time, this was a standard question every employee meeting. Why do you make us pay for parking? All the others give us free. I said, do all the others give you free transport also? No. Yeah, I'm giving you I don't want you to be stressed out. When you come to the office, I want you to be peaceful. I want to, I'll give you the whole air conditioned cab to come here, but for a time, because 15 minutes more, I'll have to start at
Right.
15 to 30 minutes earlier. I said, yeah, that's fine. But one, we are solving the parking issue. Two, we are solving the pollution issue.
Correct. Yeah.
And the traffic congestion issue. Three things I'm trying to solve at the same time. And I'm giving an alternative. Now, so people ask me, US people used to be absolutely flabbergasted when they heard this. But I said, that's what is required in India today. Unfortunately, not many, I don't think anybody followed this advice. Some people do give the free transport, but that too typically is for shifts. And parking, though, I don't think people charge. So
Right.
so this was just an example of how you have to think differently, because that's relevant now in this case, it was relevant in the Indian context, but not necessarily for their employees. For employees, again, we created something called a housing assistance plan, which was like, if you're paying EMIs for your house in Pune, that is in the city of posting, then 20% of that, subject to some 1 month salary or something, will be reimbursed to you. And I used to joke saying that if you have a 3-bedroom hall kitchen house and one room, you should credit to the company. Okay. But again, tremendous thing, because two things happen. One is that, and now I wouldn't do it today, because those days the real estate prices used to double every 4 or 5 years.
Right.
So I used to say that, look, invest in that. It's a wealth creation program for you. And selfishly, what happens is that once you buy a house there, then you get rooted to that city. Unless your competition is only then within the city. You don't go to Bangalore, you don't go to Hyderabad. So in a way, it was also a retention mechanism.
Yeah. So what I find interesting, Nitin, is that most of these sites usually start with a cost arbitrage kind of a model, right? And then as they start growing, there are bigger aspirations for the site head, for the site itself, people that, yeah, we want to do more meaningful work. But now you've hired different kinds of people with different kinds of expectations. Now you're trying to do something different. So how do you then make that switch? Is that switch possible? How
Yeah.
easy is it?
It is possible. You have to operate on different planes. So in my current company, we employ claims adjudicators who are probably the lowest of the rung, meaning just any graduate would do. They would come in, don't even need great communications. It's basically mostly hire from the BPOs, and we pay better than BPOs. We obviously give much better treatment than the BPOs, and even the dignity is much better, etc. So that's one end. The other end, we hire high end data scientists with NLP and everything else, who are doing that cutting edge work also, and everything in between. But all this, I don't buy the argument that cost arbitrage is no longer an issue. It is an issue. If I was sitting in the US and if I didn't have cost arbitrage, I would not hire in India, even as an Indian. Yes, I want cost arbitrage, but at the same time, I want equally good, if not better quality. I want equally large number of good talent availability. That's what distinguishes us. See, lots of people, are available even in Eastern Europe and other Asian countries, but the combination of cost arbitrage plus the talent availability plus the scalability, that is what India is known for, and that's why people come here. So I don't look down upon any, like we have. I've run a call center also. I've run BPO operations and I've run high end engineering jobs. Each one of them is equally important because a company needs all these jobs. It's not, you can't choose them. We have people who can do these jobs. So you have to be conscious of making sure that all of them are, they may not be paid the same. They'll be paid whatever is appropriate industry benchmark, and that is driven purely by demand and supply. But all of them should get the same dignity. None of our policies are like BU specific or level specific. Everybody gets the same kind of a treatment, same kind of policy. So you have to be able to work and offer. It's like that, right? Think of your parent company as your customer. What is their pinpoint? What is their need? They want to achieve the same or higher quality at a lower cost. That's their pinpoint because they have to be competitive in the market again. And that's what you have to offer.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it always boils down to that customer focus. I spoke to Prashant and he was talking about this in the context of individuals as well. And he was
Yeah.
talking about what is the value that you are adding. Yeah, I think this chat is like the best of reels from multiple conversations that we have had. On that note, Nitin, we'll come to the end of this. We will ask you, this is the last section where we will ask you for your hot takes on the future relevance of some things that we'll ask you about.
Okay.
It's not really a rapid fire, but you can give me a
Sure.
hot take, right? So, what do you think is the future relevance of IITs in India?
So IITs themselves, I think, are getting more broad-based. Meaning, when I was there were 5 IITs. Now I lost count of how many IITs are there. It's a good thing, in my opinion.
Right.
That elitist kind of a thing which was there. That if you were from IIT, then you are special. I don't think that's a good thing. Yes, but we need to broad base that. We have 1.3 billion people. We have many more engineers required, just like doctors also. We need to have more high-end education. So I think they are relevant. But they need to continue to be broad based. People, some of my colleagues, classmates, etc., they feel bad that there are so many IITs now. I think it's the greatest thing that has happened.
Okay. The next one, the natural next one is what is the future relevance of IIMs?
Same story. IIMs also have grown tremendously. And see, the thing is, MBAs had been almost devalued. Today, sorry to say, but I hire MBAs in healthcare after some clinical education who chose to do MBA in healthcare, and I come and work with me as claim adjudicators, which is, I find it a real pity. Of course, they're good. They rise in the company. That all apart, but I think the whole MBA degree got devalued because of the proliferation, just like the engineering colleges did, right? So that's why the IITs, you can be assured of, okay, it may not be IIT Bombay level or IIT, the top level, but once you say IIT, like the COAP or like VNIT, etc., they can be assured of a certain standard. So that's exactly what is needed for the MBA education. Therefore, I am spreading their wings and I am Udaipur, for example, a good friend of mine runs it. It's a phenomenal institution. The more I read about it, the more impressed I am. This is what is required. Indore, Nagpur, Pune doesn't have one. These cities require IIMs, and not because they are big cities, but the sheer number of students who can really make a difference is huge.
Okay. And final one, Nitin, what is the future relevance of Ranji Trophy?
Uh, yeah. So there are diehards like me who fortunately are feeling vindicated with the latest, the way things have gone in Test cricket.
Right.
The obituary of Test cricket was written several years ago when one day cricket started, and of course when T20 started, it became even more doesn't have any relevance. But Test cricket has shown that it has actually tremendous relevance, and when you see packed stands in the UK with for Test cricket and every test going into the not knowing even on the last day who's going to win or whether it's going to be a draw. When
Right.
that starts happening consistently,
Hmm.
you think you start realizing the relevance. Now, Ranji Trophy, some format changes may be there in terms of the way the points are calculated, etc., etc. But I think it's a great building ground for Test cricket. And if Test cricket is going to be relevant in the future, Ranji Trophy automatically becomes relevant for the future. Now,
Right.
whether you should, for a country like India, I do believe that we can afford to have treat it like two or three different sports.
Hmm.
Just like in the winter sports, you have the same basic skill, but you have different varieties, right? Or even
Hmm.
in uh, running, you have sprints within that 100-meter,
Hmm.
200-meter,
Hmm.
then you have 400, then you have 800, long distance, marathon, and you have the hurdle. So many varieties, right? Why not treat them like three different sports and not just think of it as cricket?
Right.
Because I enjoy the T20 game as much as the one-day game, and of course, Test cricket is the perennial favorite. So there is a enough scope and enough number of people both wanting to play and wanting to watch. So I don't
Right.
think there's any problem of relevance.
Yeah. And do you think there's going to be any change in format, or do you wish there's any change of format, more foreigners playing in Ranji Trophy
Yeah,
teams,
yeah.
and
I
all of
think it
that?
should be like the county cricket in UK, where you do get just like T20 IPL. Really, after the foreigners came in, it did really made a difference. So
Hmm. Hmm.
certainly, see, the first change that they made was people like Wasim Jafar going and playing here,
Right.
Rishikesh Connector
Hmm.
going somewhere, Rohan Gavaskar played for Calcutta. So that was the first step. Now,
Hmm.
next step can be Labuschagne coming and playing for Maharashtra, for example.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So
Hmm.
why not?
Hmm.
So we can have those quotas. You can have no more than two or whatever. Those
Hmm.
rules are can be. And the other thing could be in terms of while it's still a 3-day, 4-day game, you can try to make it result oriented. So right now
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
not that result oriented. So some
Hmm.
rules which can make it more result oriented.
On that note, Nitin, thanks a lot. I think this was a great interview for many reasons about the content of what you spoke, and also for the best background that we've ever had for any of our CTQ Smartcast guests. The most serene and picturesque background that we've had till now. But like always, Nitin, this is a great chat. We learned a few secrets about your own routines, about your thoughts about future relevance, and the kind of books and things that you have influenced you, what you look for in people that you hire. So thanks a lot, Nitin, for this.
My pleasure. Absolutely pleasure. Thank you very much, Harish. Thank you very much.